Captives chained with broken strings and worn out souls. Years of gold and some with wings. Some are old, some undersold. To grow we need to rely on and try on some other people's shoes. Some other people's shoes.
Welcome, of course, into Other People's Shoes. Of course, I'm your host, Neil Matthews. I love talking to people from the great state of California, more specifically the San Diego area. Being a San Diego Oceanside Camp Pendleton kid that I am, it's so cool to at least think that I'm in San Diego right now with our next guest. He is, of course, a father. He's a husband. He's a pastor. Again, listen up, folks. When the pastor speaks, amazing things tend to happen. He's an author. He's also, of course, the host of a podcast that you might want to check out. Maybe not right this moment, but maybe in the next couple of days of spiritual life and leadership. That's something we all can dive into, right? Help me welcome in my guest, Markus. Markus, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Neil. How are you doing?
You know, I'm better than I deserve. I did steal that from Ramsey, so
nice.
give credit where
Yep.
credit's due, but it is my favorite phrase.
Good.
So,
Awesome.
to Markus, what size shoes do you wear?
What size shoes do I wear?
Yeah, because if we're going to be
11,
in your
yeah.
shoes today, we got to know what what we're wearing,
right. Of course. So about 11, sometimes 10 and a half, depending on the brand, I guess. But yeah, about 11.
Do you have a certain brand that you like more than another?
So I like wearing Vans or Skechers. But my favorite shoes these days
Yes.
are these laceless. I think I'm looking at them right now. What are they? I think they're Skechers. Yeah, they're Skechers, and they don't have shoelaces, and I love them because they look good, but they look casual, but they look just formal enough that I can go like to a meeting with them on, or something.
Yeah.
And I can just slide them on and off. Anyway, they're my favorite shoes, and they're almost all I ever wear. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Vans now, so I'm
Okay.
gonna go with you on that. Our logo looks very similar, perhaps, to maybe some Vans. So if you look closely, you might see a remnants of the Vans shoes.
Cool. I'll have to
I
pay attention
myself,
next time I see it.
I am wearing some Nike shoes. They are light blue in nature, and they do have a North Carolina logo on the shoe tongue. So yeah, I'm a big
Very
North Carolina
cool.
fan. So there we are. So that's what I'm wearing.
Nice.
So we'll get that out of the way. So Markus,
And
go ahead.
well, I didn't know you were from San Diego, Oceanside. That's pretty cool.
So my dad is a Marine. Was a Marine. He's retired now. So I lived there from, my mom's going to be mad, and my dad too, because I don't remember these dates. But I know we were there in 92, and we might have been there in 84. I do know that because the Olympic torch went by. Wow,
that's cool.
That's reminiscing right now.
Very cool,
Through the
yeah.
base, we saw the Olympic torch go through when it was in
Really?
LA.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kind of fun.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
sitting out on
good
our
to know.
balcony
Yeah.
in base housing, seeing the Olympic torch go by. That's pretty cool.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Markus, I'm curious of this.
Yeah.
How does one determine they're successful?
Oh, man. Good question. So I used to say, or I shouldn't say I used to say this. I used to internally believe, right, success was measured by basically bigger and better, right? The more you could show on the outside for what you've accomplished is how you determine success. So in terms of me being a pastor, how many people showed up on Sunday, how big is your budget, and then also how nice are your facilities, right? Your church building, is it old and needs a new paint job, or does it have nice clean lines and new stucco, as we often have in Southern California? But having been to some stuff that I'll share today, my perspective on success has totally changed to where it has nothing to do with with how good you look or what the world thinks of as success, but it's our faithfulness, just staying faithful to what we've been called to do. And if we're faithful to that, numbers don't matter. It's just am I living out the life that God has called me to live? Am I being faithful to that? That's how I would define success.
I love that a lot because, and much like you, maybe when you started podcasting or maybe even, you've been a
Uh-huh.
speaker, communicator for a long time and now author, and we'll
Uh-huh.
get to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But so much of our society is driven by, well, how many subscribers do you have? How many listeners do you
Yeah.
have? How many
Yeah.
followers do you have? How many,
Yeah.
retweets do you have? How many?
Yeah.
And I love what you're
Yeah.
saying there because your value should never come and nor should you measure your success by accomplishments, if I'm hearing you right.
Okay. Yeah, totally. And I totally feel that. Like, and I'm a pastor in a very small church now. And in my church, I tell my elders and my people, don't worry about how many people show up. I mean, obviously we don't want to totally disappear, but let's not worry about that in terms of measuring our success. But I do feel it, with the podcast. Like, I'm like, man, I thought I'd have more listeners than this by now. But I at least have the perspective to remind myself, you know what, God is using what I'm doing in the lives of those who need to hear it right now. And maybe there'll be more later, maybe there won't, but that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is just to do what I've been called to do for right now and trust that God is using it as God wants to use it.
Amen. I couldn't have said it better myself. I love that because, again, right, we have to kind of set aside the fact of, I'm not doing this for who. I'm not doing this for them. I'm not doing this for whatever. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So Markus, going into your story, first off, I know your story not quite as in depth as you do, obviously, because it happened to you personally, but through other shows that you've shared your story on, and I appreciate you giving us some moments to share your story, because to me, people need to know it because it could change someone's life, I think, in a lot of respects, because what had happened to you is so wrong on so many levels. And I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how you were wrongfully accused of what you were accused of.
Yeah. So, so this all started back in 2015. Hard to believe it's been almost 5 years since then. But I had just started a 3-month sabbatical. I'd been in my church for a little over 7 years. And about 2 weeks into my sabbatical, I got a call from our executive presbyter. I'm Presbyterian, and he's sort of like the guy over, in this case, a guy, could be a woman, but overseeing, our regional cluster of churches. And so he gave me a call. He said, hey, can I meet with you tomorrow? And I was on sabbatical. I said, no, I'm going to be out of town tomorrow. I'm visiting some friends. And after some back and forth, I asked him, what's it about? He's like, oh, I can't tell you. And he said, can you cancel your trip? I was going up to visit my friends in LA. And I said, no, I'm on sabbatical and you haven't told me what this is about. I'm not going to cancel, hanging out with some friends that I've made. Oh my gosh. Hang on. Are you still there?
I am. Yep.
Okay. Okay. Another edit. So now I had another call coming in.
That's okay.
Is there some way to decline those or keep them from popping in?
Do you have an iPhone?
I do.
So if you put it on Do Not Disturb, if you slide from the top, there's a little, there's a little like moon or whatever that is.
The moon.
Yep.
And that'll keep other calls from coming.
Yes, it should.
Okay.
Ideally, it should. Turn it on Do Not Disturb, and then you can do the same thing if you have an Apple Watch too, which I'm guessing you probably
good.
do.
I don't actually.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I can't figure out why I would need one. I haven't figured that out yet. But
they're amazing. So
really?
Yeah.
Okay. If you say so, I haven't figured it out. But I know lots of people with them. Anyway,
so you're going to LA.
I'm going to LA.
Yep.
Oh, so so I said no. I'm not going to cancel this trip to go visit friends and my brother and I don't even know what this is about. And so anyway, I was a little frustrated, and then we finally agreed to meet on Sunday that same weekend. And he came over, and basically he said, well, Markus, someone has accused you of having a problem with pornography. And I said, oh. and with some more conversation, I said, well, is there anything? I mean, what do you need to do? He said, well, we need to do a forensic analysis on your laptop. And I said, do you need my laptop right now? Would you like to have it right now? And he said that would be good. So I gave him my laptop right away. And let me just say, it's not like I've never looked at pornography in my life. I think in some ways it's almost impossible not to, as a man, and especially the young man with the internet these days. But I've been in an accountability relationship for a long time with another pastor here in our presbytery. And, he gets reports every week on all of my internet use across all of my devices. And I have another small group of accountability friends, and we get together. It used to be every week. Now it's about once a month or so, but we text each other on a regular basis. So, just because it is a constant danger, those are some of the safeguards that I've put in place and had already been in place for quite a while by the time, these allegations came along. So, I wasn't worried about giving him my laptop.
Now, was the laptop yours or was it like church property?
Yeah, good question. So technically it was the church's laptop, and that's why he could claim it.
That's
mine,
what I was wondering too. As I said, that was the one question I had as I was listening to, you retelling your story on a couple of your shows, and I was like, okay, no one's asking, is this his laptop? Is this the church laptop? I'm like, come on, guys, that's basic. Come on.
I'm glad
Not judge another host, but come on, ask the basic question there.
Good. So anyway, I did give him my laptop. I don't think I've ever mentioned this when I've told the story either. He actually went to our session, our board of elders, and under false pretenses got them to agree to checking all church computers, said, oh, we're doing it for all the churches. We'd like to start with you. And the elders are like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Are you kidding? He goes to the church and starts basically like looking at internet history for every single computer in the church?
Well, I think they did in order to, maintain the
integrity of them taking your laptop / church laptop.
Right. But he didn't tell them, that it's because of these allegations or anything like that.
Wow.
Which is fine, but it's just, he's still.
But it's kind of shady, right?
Totally shady.
Okay.
Totally shady.
All right.
Yeah.
Just checking.
And some of our elders later were not happy about that, and neither were other pastors in the presbytery who heard about this eventually. So anyway, so I gave him the laptop. He said it would take 2 or 3 days. It ended up taking 3 weeks, which was really, really frustrating. Finally, I guess just before he would have given it back, he called me and he said, Markus, the analysis is done, but I can't give you your laptop back because it's now a potential criminal investigation. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was just like,
and you're still on sabbatical, right? I mean, you're still
on sabbatical.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah, so I'm like 2 or 3. I guess I'm about 4 or 5 weeks into my sabbatical now. And I was just totally blindsided by this. I had no idea where this was coming from, what they possibly could have found. I mean, I thought, maybe, there was some old stuff from a long time ago, like, in a whatever, some file that, not that I'd saved, but that just got, how the website puts stuff on your computer,
like some spamware or some malware or something of that
exactly.
nature. Sure, yeah.
So I thought maybe that, but I'm like, nothing illegal. And so I'm thinking, of course, my mind goes to child pornography, but I'm like, well, I've never looked at child pornography, but like, is there something that looks like it? And then, of course, I'm also thinking, is there, did someone put something on my computer? Our tech guy at our church was not a fan of mine at this time. And I was like, did he put something on there? And maybe it's not child pornography. Maybe it's like, bomb making instructions or something, and so anyway, so I'm just like grasping for just some kind of understanding in my mind, and that just sort of set off just a really dark time for me. The rest of my sabbatical was just really, really dark and difficult, and I remember being at home, and I happened to be the only one home in the evening that night, except for my then 2 or 3 year old son. He's 7 now. Um, and I just started crying. And he was like, "Daddy, what you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so glad he doesn't really understand." But I was just like, I had no idea what was happening and where this would go. And I was scared. I was afraid. Um, I have my accountability partner, who's also a friend, during all this time, was really, really helpful to me. And he went to bat for me in ways that I couldn't go to bat for myself. Um, he and another pastor in our presbytery met with our executive presbyter, and they were like, "Hey, you are going about this the wrong way. We have a process." And that was part of the problem too, is that we have a process in our Presbyterian Book of Order. If someone makes allegations, here are the steps you take. The problem was that the person who made the allegations didn't want to make formal allegations, right? So they wanted to be kind of, off the record. And so this was an off the record investigation, which left me with no protection whatsoever. So my friend and this other pastor confronted our executive presbyter and said, let's start over. Let's do it the right way. And he said, no, this is the way my advisors have told me I need to do it. Whoever these advisors were, I have an idea. But anyway, so I was scared, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And about another 2 or 3 weeks into it, I was like, I think I need a lawyer, because I don't know who has my laptop. I know that the authorities. Did I say that already? He said we need to give your laptop over to the authorities.
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, and
the FBI had it, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I found that out later.
Okay.
I didn't know that yet.
Right.
Is it the local police? Is it some department of something? So I met with an attorney, and my wife and I both met with her, and I said, this is what's happened, and whereas in the past, yes, I have seen regular, pornography, but a while ago, a long time ago, never have I seen child pornography, right? Never, ever. And so she said, well, I have some experience with child pornography, and I didn't even know that going into this meeting. And she said, if you're guilty, I'm not going to defend you. You need to know that. I was like, okay. And then she kind of asked me questions, and she painted a really kind of stark picture of what it would be like, if I was going to be arrested. They're going to come bang on your door at 4 or 5 in the morning and get you out of bed. And I was like, whoa. And then after about an hour, she said, well, I can tell you're not guilty. And I was like, really? How can you tell? But I was like this spark of hope inside of me, right? And she said, well, you're not asking the right questions. If you were guilty, you'd be asking questions like, how much time am I looking at? What's our defense going to be? And she said, you're just asking about when you can get your laptop back. And it was like this wave of relief. And I was just like, oh my gosh, somebody understands, right? Somebody can see through all the crap and see the truth here. And so I was, anyway, that was like a moment of grace. And my wife and I both left that meeting and just like, thank you, Lord, thank you so much for this. And this lady was really great. She'd never charged me, which I'm so grateful for, because it probably would have been really expensive. She said, if I ever have to, sit down with you, like come meet with you again or something, then we can talk about money. For now, I'll send some emails, make a few phone calls and try to get you some justice. And so that was a gift. Through this time, I'm wrestling with all kinds of questions about myself, about God. I was not, clinically depressed, but I felt depressed. I felt down. I felt dark, and it really affected my sense of self-worth, because I thought to myself, how come I don't deserve due process? How come they aren't willing to go through the actual process of that's laid out in our polity? Because I bet they wouldn't do that to so and so from that big church, or so and so from that big church, but they'll do it to me from this little church. That's how I was thinking about it in any case. And and so I was with my friend Kevin, who was my accountability partner and was going to bat for me, and I was just overwhelmed by the way that he was caring for me during this time, and the way that he would fight for me during this time. And he would call me or text me about every other day or so. He would take me out, for drinks or just to hang out about once a week or so. And I was driving home from hanging out with him one night, and I just talking to God. I was just like saying, Lord, he doesn't have to do this for me. Like, he's putting a lot of time and a lot of energy into all this. Of course, I know I'm his friend, but it just sort of opened up in me this sense of a low, I guess, for lack of a better word, low self-esteem. That sounds trite, but low self-worth, or I just felt like, wow, there is this part of me that doesn't feel like I deserve to be loved. And so the next day I happened to go to the beach and was surfing, trying to. I'm not great, but I'm okay. But I'm sitting out in the water, and I realized, Lord, I've been telling myself for 30 years, that whenever I do something wrong, Lord, I don't deserve your love, And I'm like, wow, that is so off base. And I was like, Lord, I've been telling myself a lie for most of my adult life, because, it just sort of revealed to me I do deserve to be loved. And so I had to tell myself, just repeat over and over, Lord, I deserve your love. Lord, I deserve your love. And not in the sense that, deserve in the sense that I've earned God's love, but I'm worthy of God's love, right? Because I'm a child of God, created in the image of God. And so I just sort of prayed that over and over, Lord, I deserve your love. Lord, I deserve your love. And then it expanded to, but you know what? I also deserve to be loved by other people. I am worthy of being loved by other people, again, because I'm a child of God, created in the image of God. And so I just had to start saying, Lord, I am worthy. I deserve just to be loved. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to be loved. And so that was a really healing moment for me. Another moment that was really profound for me, and maybe the most profound moment, I spent a lot of time during this sabbatical in scripture and prayer and silence and solitude. And I'm kind of grateful that it happened while I was on sabbatical, because I had the time to reflect and contemplate a lot and draw close to God in silence, scripture, and prayer. And I was sitting on my patio one day, and I had been reading in one of the Psalms, I think. I don't remember which one. But as I was sitting and praying, and I just had this thought that, holy cow, I could lose everything. I thought, I could lose my job, which I did eventually, right? I thought I could lose my ordination, right? I could have my ordination as a Presbyterian pastor taken away from me. I could lose my reputation. That was kind of worse, right? I could become that guy. Markus, he used to be at that church, but we know what happened to him. I thought I could lose my family, right? If it looks like I'm guilty. And, in retrospect, I don't think I would have lost my family, but, in those moments, you go to all those worst case scenarios. And so I thought, man, I could lose my family. And then I thought, holy cow, I could become a registered sex offender. And I imagined myself, without a family, having to move to a new town and having to then register. And then, and everywhere I go, this thing that isn't even true is going to follow me. People are going to believe something about me that isn't true. And then I thought I could go to prison. And I had this moment where I just sort of saw myself sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything, right? Everything had been taken away from me. And then it was like I heard God say, but Markus, you will never lose my love for you. Right? That's the one thing no one can ever take away from you. And in that moment, it's just like I understood God's love in a much, much deeper, more profound way than I had ever experienced before. And of course, I always believed that God loves me unconditionally, right? I would always, of course, I would have said, yes, God loves me unconditionally. But now it was like, oh, no, no, God loves me. I mean, unconditionally, right? In a way that I could never even fathom. But I felt like I got a taste of it in that moment. And that was just totally transformative for me. Um, I think that's partly why I don't care about the numbers anymore, right? What I care about now is just that people know that they are God's beloved. I read some really great books during that sabbatical. I read books uh, Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. I read Abba's Child by Brennan Manning. I read Shame and Grace by Lewis Smedes. I read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro. And so these were all just really helpful. They fed me, and they were exactly what I needed during that time. One of the things that Henry Nouwen says in Life of the Beloved, he said that when you find yourself to be God's beloved, it's like all you want is for everyone else also to know that they are God's beloved. And so in a way, that's what this has done for me, is it's clarified that my calling is not to grow a church or to, be what the world calls successful, but just to help people know that they are God's beloved.
That's so powerful, Marcus. That whole story is powerful. I know later on, right, there's a vote. They end up voting you out, and that's a weird kind of thing too, how that happened. But but first off, I mean, the idea of someone accusing you, one, of pornography, that's a pretty steep accusation. But then when you throw in the child pornography aspect of it, I think that ratchets it up quite a bit, obviously.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And to me, you end up getting the laptop back, by the way. That is the end of that story. But you end up leaving that church, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so this was the summer of 1996. I didn't end up leaving until April of the next year. So there was a lot that happened. I was exonerated. Basically, the FBI said there's nothing here. And I think what happened is, I have kids. I have a daughter, and there are probably pictures of her when she was little, goofing around in her underwear. In fact, I know I have pictures like that, right? Like all parents do. And the guy doing the forensic analysis was like, well, it's not my job to determine whether or not this is pornography, so let me just hand it off, and then, the FBI can decide. And, and I was relieved. His report said that, no adult pornography was found on the laptop. Okay, well, good. That's what I expected, but I'm really glad to see it in writing. And that was reassuring to my elders eventually, too. Okay, good. Anyway, you want me to continue the story? The rest of it goes faster.
Yeah, that's fine. But, yeah. Give us the end of the story.
Yeah. So, so at the end of my sabbatical, the executive presbyter, texted me and said, "Hey, I've got your laptop. Would you like to come get it today?" And I said, "Yes, I'll come by. I'll get it today." And then my friend Kevin said, "Hey, why don't you just check with your attorney to see if there's anything you should ask him?" And so I asked her that, and she was actually still saying, "Hey, actually, you should not be in contact with him. The only contact should be between attorneys at this point. And so why don't you tell him that as soon as we get approval that this investigation has been closed, then you guys can start talking again. But in the meantime, tell him he can bring your laptop to my office and you can get it from me." So that's what I told him. And his response was a 4-letter email. And he said, "Marcus, what investigation?" And then signed off with his name. And I was like, are you effing kidding me? I was so angry at that. And I was like, I don't ever want to talk to this guy again. Well, for better or for worse, he had actually already announced his resignation. He was moving on, and the following week was going to be his last week, it would have been much more difficult for me if he had stayed. And so, I take it from the Lord that it was his time to move on. And so I didn't have to deal with him. Maybe if he had stayed, we'd have had some kind of reconciliation, but that's not how that played out. But anyway, so I went back to work, and I thought, okay, Lord, thank you, it's done, it's over. Let's get going. And I had a new perspective on ministry, and I was preaching differently. I was talking a lot more about spiritual formation and about what God calls us to, just in terms of loving the world as opposed to doing the right thing and all that. And then a few weeks later, I was in a meeting, and someone from the presbytery office hand delivered me an envelope, and someone joked, "Oh, are you being served?" Well, I looked at the envelope later, and essentially that is what was happening. Now, formal allegations had been made, this time including child pornography. And I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, what are you doing? Why would you let this happen to me? And just tons of anxiety. And it said that I would have to meet, with a panel of, folks from the presbytery for them to decide if I needed to be put on, administrative leave. And I was really anxious, but then it was interesting because over the next few days, the anxiety just sort of diminished. And I was like, you know what, Lord, you got me through it the first time, you'll get me through it again. And so I met with that panel, my wife came too, and after, basically I just had an opportunity to ask questions. There wasn't much discussion, but then they left to make their deliberation, came back, and it was interesting because the guy in charge, who was another pastor who I knew, he was a friend of mine, but totally different kind of context. He came back and he said, well, look, we're not going to put you on leave, and here's why. And they had spelled out in this document they gave me that basically the person had no firsthand knowledge of anything, any inappropriate actions on the part of the accused, meaning me. But the reason that they're making these allegations was because, my laptop had gone to the FBI, and even though, they decided not to pursue an indictment, there must be something there, right? And so that was sort of their reasoning. So that was a gift to me because I was like, okay, oh Lord, good, thank you, just for giving me the assurance that they actually have nothing to stand on here, right? It's a completely baseless accusation. But it did lead to a formal investigation. I was actually grateful for the formal investigation because at least this time, whatever happened, it would be on the record. And I felt secure knowing that I would be exonerated again. And 3 months later, I was exonerated again. This investigative committee found that there was no evidence to support the allegations. And so, again, I felt like, okay, Lord, thank you. It's over. It's done. Now we can move on. Except that I did find out who it was, and it was another staff person. And this staff person just would not let it go. I had a meeting with this person and the chair of our personnel committee, and she just got very vocal and angry and in that meeting. And so they decided, let's make this person let's put one of the elders in a supervisory position over this person, and that was fine with me. And then I think eventually the personnel committee just sort of felt afraid that she would try to sue the church or something. I don't know, but they eventually recommended that the session ask for my resignation. And when the session heard this, the elders, they were like, wait, what? Why would we ask for Marcus's resignation? Like, we love Marcus. Let's see if we can work this out between the two of them, and they're like, are you open to some sort of mediation? I was like, yeah, I'm open to that. Well, let's find out if she is. And so she was not. And so then she made the same allegations one final time, this time to the session at our church. And so we had a meeting in which we talked about it. And our new executive presbyter came to that meeting. He said, as far as the presbytery is concerned, this is a closed matter. And my friend Kevin came, and my accountability partner. He's like, look, I've got years worth of accountability reports that I can show you without any incidences of any kind of pornography. And so, we left for about half an hour. They discussed, we came back in and they said, Marcus, we want you to know that you have our trust as our pastor. I was like, oh, wow. Internally, I'm thinking, this is great, and they said, and we are not going to ask for your resignation, and we're going to contact our insurance company to brace for a lawsuit for the staff person. I was like, man, again, I felt like, Lord, thank you. Maybe now it's over. Except that one of those elders, for whatever reason, decided to believe the accusation, and she immediately resigned from session, and she started calling people in the congregation, telling them that Pastor Marcus is into child pornography. And we didn't know that for a few weeks. We, being me and the other elders, we didn't know this was happening. But of course, as soon as we found that out, it was like, well, that's the end of it, right? There's kind of no coming back from that. We did have a town hall meeting where we kind of laid it out for the congregation what was going on, and then we had our annual congregational meeting after that, and then that's where the congregation voted me out. Although it was only by a margin of 2 votes. So basically, if one person had changed their vote from a no to a yes, or vote him out to vote him, keep him in, it would have been a tie vote, right? Anyway, so it was a slim margin. But by the time I had gotten to that, I was just like, thank you, Lord, I'm free. It was just more of a relief than anything else. And what's interesting is the very next day, I was on a plane to Little Rock, Arkansas for a pastor's retreat that had been on my calendar already for 6 months. And I just remember sitting on the plane thinking, Lord, you knew I was going to need it this week. And it was wonderful. And ironically, I was not the only person who was there who had been voted out that very same day by their congregation. So anyway, eventually I ended up working for a nonprofit. That was a very healing experience with some really wonderful people doing some really great ministry, and just sort of gave me an opportunity to heal from really what was a lot of trauma. I still feel the trauma in some ways, just in a lack of trust around some people. Not certain individuals, but just sort of I'm a little bit more wary in churches than I used to be. But that's part of the journey, I guess. But that's my story.
That's amazing. I mean, hearing it again, there's just so many things that are wrong with what happened with you, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I don't know, being in San Diego, I'm sure you've probably heard of this band. Maybe they're pretty big. Switchfoot. You ever heard of those guys?
Yep.
John Foreman. Love to have him. So if you ever, bump into him at a coffee shop or maybe surfing, just, hand him my card or, something like that. But
you got it.
But their name, I don't know if you know this or not, but Switchfoot actually is a surfing term.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it actually means that you switch your feet, which means you're going in a different direction. Switch your stance, so you're facing the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And I just thought of you when we were preparing today, is I thought, man, everything that's happened to him, he really chose to say, you know what? I'm not going to let this phase me. I'm going to switch my feet. I'm going to go in a different direction, switch my stance even. Not that you ever gave up, Christ or the church or anything like that, but the idea that you've switched your direction and that now you're focused on, obviously spiritual life and spiritual leadership. And I would imagine that comes with discipleship as well, right?
Totally. That's right. I mean, that's what, since you're using the name of my podcast, that's the spiritual life. Well, it's all discipleship, right? All of life is discipleship. And that's one of the things that I feel like I've gotten through this experience, is just a much broader understanding of discipleship. In fact, I would say that discipleship, so I used to say discipleship is about growing in your faith, which it is. But now the way I would put it is discipleship is about becoming more fully yourself, right? And I feel like in a way that's partly what happened through that experience, is I became more fully myself. I had a mask on. And in a lot of ways I still do. We all have masks, right? We have the self. Sometimes some people call it the false self that we present to the world. and we want to present successfulness. We want to present competence, right? Accomplishment, and just like we've got it all together. That's our false self, right? And sometimes, like, you can totally see it in some people, and some people, you don't see it quite as much. It's always there a little bit, but then there's the true self on the inside. That's the self that God is interested in, right? God isn't interested in our false self. God isn't interested in all the things that we do or say or try to present to the world to show how worthy of acceptance we are. God is interested in our true self, right? The self that only He sees, right, fully. And so I think discipleship involves ongoing surrender to God, right? Letting go more and more of this false self that we try to convince people that we are, and just embracing more and more our true self. Or embracing, this comes from Shame and Grace by Lewis Smedes, one of the books I read during that sabbatical. He said we need to, it's not an exact quote, but we need to be able to embrace our raw material, right? And I'm like, you know what? That's what I need to do. I'm broken, I'm sinful, and I'm weak, and I have a low sense of self-worth, and that's who I am, and that's the me that God loves. And it's just because of the nature of these allegations, I mean, I just in terms of my own spiritual self-worth, my own sin, and just all kinds of sin, and feeling, recognizing the feeling of worthlessness because of all my sin, and discovering that my sin does not make me worthless in the eyes of God. My sin does not. That sounds maybe contrary to certainly what I used to say. It doesn't. My sin, I don't know. It doesn't condemn me.
I was going to say, does it define you? Can I help you with that?
Right. Good.
Like our
yeah.
sin
No.
should never define who we are. I mean, it should be a mirror in our face and be like, ooh, I got to get rid of that. Like it's a blemish of some sort.
Yes. In fact, our sin does not define us, right? In fact, I sent an email about this to my email list because Kobe Bryant died this week. So I know this is coming out in March, but it's February, early February right now or something, right?
Right.
And but there's some tension there because he's possibly guilty of rape. So what do we do? Are we okay with grieving someone who committed rape, 15, almost 20 years ago? And so I was sort of reflecting that. My son is a huge Kobe Bryant fan, and so he is grieving terribly right now. He's 14. And so I'm kind of walking through that with him. But I was reflecting on Kobe Bryant. His primary identity is not, that he's guilty of sexual assault. He may be guilty of it, but that's not his primary identity. His primary identity is beloved child of God, right? And that's everyone's primary identity. That's my primary identity. That's your primary identity. Everyone who's listening, that's your primary identity. You are a beloved child of God.
But I think on that, I think we so many times want to put whoever it may be, Kobe, we want to put the president, we want to put, insert name, whoever, you, myself, family members, coworkers, acquaintances, whatever. We want to put them in this category of, well, you've done this, so that's all you'll ever be. And I love what you're saying. That resonates so much that you're more than that. There's more to you than just what you were.
Yeah.
For sure. That's not your identity. To go with our theme, that's not your identity.
Right. And can you imagine if every one of us were to be defined by our worst moments, right?
Oh, that'd be terrible.
I'm not. Yeah. I mean, every single one of us would be, every single person in the world would be an utter horror, would be completely rejected by everyone else if we defined ourselves by our worst moments.
It's that old book. I never read it, but The Scarlet Letter, right? The lady that's wearing the Scarlet Letter, right? We all had to wear the A of adultery or whatever it was.
Yeah. I haven't read that. I read that in high school. That
Okay,
was a
well,
long
I
time
never
ago.
read
I should
it,
read that
so
again. Okay, yeah, but no,
I'm
that's
not
a
a
good
big
point.
book reader. I probably
Exactly.
should be a better book reader, but
You know, I never
I
thought
really
about
love
that.
audiobooks, so get it to me on
I
audio. I will listen all day long.
know.
I
Yeah,
retain
well, me
information
too.
so much better if I hear it. So
Really
Marcus,
good.
a couple
Yeah,
things. First off, thanks for sharing your story. Powerful stuff.
yeah.
I really, really value what you shared. And thanks
Mm.
for walking us through that. But how was your identity defined then, and then how is it now?
Like before,
Yeah,
how
before,
was it?
how would you
Yeah.
define it, and then how would you define it now?
So before, I would have defined it as, you know, uh, wannabe successful pastor.
Okay,
How about that?
like
Um,
Joel Osteen successful, or maybe not that far.
well, no, not necessarily. But I was in a church of about 100 people, and I wanted to be in a church of 1,000 people.
And is that more
Or at
ego
least,
driven or more just
yeah, oh,
wanting to be
totally
used by
more
God?
ego driven.
Okay, just
No,
checking.
that was ego. Yeah. Now, I'm sure you're right. There's a mix in there, right? I
Right.
also
You want to
wanted
serve,
people
but
to
yeah,
know.
I get it.
That's right. There's a mixture in there, but there was certainly more ego then than there is now. In fact, I think part of the whole purpose, I don't know if I want to say purpose, but what God did with it is that He exposed and stripped away much of my ego. There's always some ego left, but I feel like I have far less ego in the negative sense than I did before, right? And so, yeah, so I would have identified myself as primarily as a pastor who wanted to grow their church and have the appearance of success, so that so that people in our church and other pastors, in our presbytery and our community would have said, "Oh wow, look at what Marcus has done with that church. What a great pastor." That's what I wanted before.
Right. Not
And
the well done, good and faithful servant. Not that.
yeah, now I would have said that that's what I wanted,
Sure.
and certainly I wouldn't have rejected that. But it's like there's levels of motive, and I think in a lot of ways the primary level of motive was I want to be well thought of, and then of course I also want God to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." I don't think at that time I would have said that. I think I would have said, "Of course, my primary motive is for God to say, well done," right? But looking back, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was more about me.
Well, because I
Um,
know for me, and not that it's about me, because it's not, but I know for me, I served as a pastor for like 8 months before I forfeited it in a lot of respects.
okay,
I gave up my calling
okay.
because of sin. Sin entered
Mm,
into my ministry. Bad
mm,
habits reoccurred, and I ended up losing a ministry because of it. But in that
mm.
process, years now later, almost 10 to be exact,
Well,
I discovered I cared more about the title in front of my name and
mm,
identifying as a pastor than I
yeah,
ever cared about the people, which is
yeah,
terrible. I wanted the office. I
right,
wanted the name on the door. I wanted the business cards to hand out. I wanted to tell people, did you know I'm a pastor? Did you know I'm a
yeah,
associate pastor? Did you know I'm a youth
uh,
pastor? I mean, it was all
yeah,
about that. And so
yeah,
when you're saying those things, obviously it resonates with me from that standpoint as well, relating with you
yeah,
on that.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so at the risk of sounding like I'm plugging myself, so I just finished writing a book
No,
called
yeah,
Beyond
absolutely.
Thingification.
I do have a
This
question on that. So yeah,
this
what
this
about your book?
so this totally relates to what you're just saying, right? One of the so I gave it the title Beyond Thingification. Thingification, it's a made up word, but I found it in another book, and I really appreciated it because it has to do with the idea of turning people into things. Um, and a lot of times, I think that that's what we do in churches, is that we turn our church members into things. It's almost like we forget that they have real needs and real stories and real hopes and real desires and real fears, and they struggle with real things. They struggle with illness or mental illness or loss, and so often we focus on, but how can I get them to show up, right? How can I get them to show up on Sunday morning or to this program or this event that we're doing? And I was totally guilty of that. Like I would have such a hard time just even reminding myself of people's actual deep down needs. Now, the people, some of them I knew better, and I was, of course, more aware of what was going on in their lives. But it's like I wouldn't think about it, and so it's like we turn people into things in our ministries, and we need to get, to use the title of my book, beyond thingification, to where we really care about not just the people in our churches, but in the people in our communities, right? So often the people in our communities are little more than potential church members, right? And yes, we want to introduce them to the love of God, but that's what but what if they don't come to our church? What if they discover the love of God through our church, but then don't come to our church? Is that okay? I think it is.
The answer I would say
right?
would be yes to that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right? Because it's not about our churches or our organizations, or right. We all exist for no other purpose than to participate with God in the healing and wholeness of the world, right? And in order to do that, we have to understand that human beings are human beings, right? Again, children of God, created in the image of God, and everyone's got a story. And we're not going to know everyone's story, but if we can at least recognize, like, this is someone who has been through who knows what over the course of their lives, some good, some bad, but it's brought them here. And how can I help them just to know that they are God's beloved? And then that's transformative. The more that someone can know that, the more they will understand God, right? And discover connection and union with God and relationship with God. So my job is not to try to get people to show up to stuff, but to actually just let them know that they are God's beloved. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I am going to continue to follow you and follow your efforts on that. And I'm looking forward to maybe hoping to get an audio copy of the book, just, if you can find time amongst your schedule.
I'm working on it.
Sweet. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I love audiobooks better than written books, but that's just how I learn better. But
well, I do both, but I love it. Yeah, totally.
That's awesome. So a couple questions as we start to wrap up, because I want to try to get to some things that have jumped out in hearing your story. So, how did you forgive those people that accused you?
Oh man, that's a good question. It's hard, and there are times when I still feel angry, and I still wouldn't want to find myself in the same room with any of those people right now. I mean, I think I could better now than I could before. I think time heals, so to speak, and makes it possible. But I was listening to Pete Scazzero's podcast, his Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, or maybe it's Emotionally Healthy Leadership podcast. And one of the questions he asked in this particular episode, he said, are you able to forgive your enemies? And I was like, no, I cannot.
Right.
Like, why do you have to ask that question? The way he put it was, are you able to pray or to ask God to bless your enemies? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want God to bless my enemies. I want them to pay for it somehow. I want some justice. And again, that was maybe a year and a half, 2 years after I had left the church. But that kind of just reminded me that that's my goal, right? That's where I need to get to. And so I do find it easier now to pray for God to bless them. And I kind of have a routine every morning, the things that I pray for. I pray for all of my past ministries, including that church. And when I do, I say, Lord, be with so-and-so and be with so-and-so. And sometimes I pray a little bit more than others, but I'm like, Lord, whatever healing they need, I pray that you would bring that healing to them.
I think that's good.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've learned is the reason, for instance, a staff person just wouldn't let go is because of her story. And I don't know all of her story. I know that her husband had a problem with pornography. And so I think here's what I had heard, that she told someone that when she told me about her husband's pornography problem, she told this person, I told my pastor and he just didn't react the way I thought he would. And so she said, so he must have a problem with that too, right? And that's my understanding of where this came from initially, right? And so there's a story there, right? Something, I don't know, maybe I don't know what she wanted from me, but something about the way I did or didn't respond triggered something in her, something in her story, in her past, some probably trauma in her past, and this is how it expressed itself. And so that helps me to forgive when I can understand, that it's coming out of probably her own pain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, angry people hurt,
That's right, for sure.
When you're mad, that's all you want to see,
Yeah.
In the Shack,
totally. Yep.
It's not a spiritually great book, but he says that, I think the author says, I'm going to mess it up, but if all you can see is pain, you'll never see me. And that's God talking to the main character of the story. But I love that, that if all I'm seeing is pain, if all I'm seeing is hate, if all I'm seeing is anger, I'm never truly going to see who God is. And I don't know. That's right. Just still powerful to me. So.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if I hold on to my bitterness, I mean, I'll never be free of it, right? And so if I'm going to be free, I have to forgive. And then just seeing the transformation that God's done in me makes me grateful for the experience too, and that makes it a little bit easier to forgive. And it is weird, like, even though on the one hand, I wish it had never happened, and I hope it never ever happens again, I would not go back and undo it, because what God did in me through it is worth all the suffering, that I experienced during that time.
Yeah. How do you want your kids to see you now through that situation and now going forward?
Yeah, so I haven't told my kids the whole story yet. They were very young at the time, and but my oldest son is 14, and so I'll probably tell him the story, in the next few years. Maybe even within a year or so. I've already thought about, I wonder if this is the time to tell him that story, At the time, it was, all they knew was that, some people were mean at the church, and Dad got voted out of that church. And but what I want them ultimately to know is, right, that they never have to feel like God has abandoned them. Let me say that differently. Sometimes it feels like God has abandoned us, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that He actually has. It means that we feel like He has, right? That's why we have all those Psalms of lament in which God, the psalmist cries out, basically, "Where are you, God?" God's there. It's hard to sense God's presence in the pain and the suffering sometimes. So that's one of the things I want them to know, and I would want them to know that you can get through it. You just keep holding on to Jesus, right? And you don't let go, and you trust that He is not letting go of you. And because they're gonna have stuff too. I hope not this, but there's always some kind of suffering in life, right? For my son right now,
cancer. We live in a fallen world. Death. I mean, you're talking about having to grieve Kobe, and there's all kinds of stuff that they're gonna have to walk through. And it's great that you're a dad to do that.
Yeah.
My dad was a Marine, and so some of the moments in life, he was, across the ocean. So it was really tough.
Yeah.
It was tough.
That would be tough.
I'm glad that you're there for your kids, though. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that too. Yeah.
So last question, then we're gonna play a game. I'm curious about this one.
Okay.
I ended up leaving the ministry that I was asked to resign from. It took a long time, about a year, and then my family and I finally left. The end of that story is actually a pretty powerful one. We actually did a whole season, our show did, on You Lost Me. It's taken out of the Barna Group study of kids leaving the church in droves. And so our season finale ended with me sitting with my former senior pastor, also my boss. and having
Wow.
kind of a reconciliation kind of episode. I encourage anyone, including you, Marcus, to go back and maybe listen
Yeah,
to that, because
I will.
it's so powerful, to think back to what could have been had I not
Mm.
been such a jerk, so much in pain, so much focus on myself rather than the ministry and the
Mm.
people,
Yeah,
the things as you
yeah,
called them in your book. But
yeah.
I'm curious about this, Marcus. Is there anything that would have caused you during that accusation period and then even afterwards to leave the church, leave faith, leave anything in general, leave Jesus essentially?
Um, I don't think so. Um, I mean, I had been, following Jesus for a long, long time, and even though, I still had a lot of blinders on, and I had a lot of shortcomings, and I still do, right? Um, I was pretty connected to God, and I had been through other things, not nearly as difficult as that had basically given me um, some assurance of faith from previous experiences, and so I don't think I ever felt like God had totally. I don't think I would ever have completely let go of my faith. I think, yeah, I don't think so. I'm trying to think under what circumstances I might, maybe if I had ended up in prison, but even then, I don't know. I think that might have been, I might have just said, okay, Lord, because I was learning about surrender throughout that whole process. And I was just surrendering one day at a time, one day at a time. And I think I had come to a point where I was like, Lord, even if I end up in prison, I'm not letting go. I'm not letting go. Um, but that's why surrender is so important. You just have to uh, receive what comes and give that to God. I don't know. I don't know if you're expecting me to say it. I might have, but
No, I didn't know what to
I don't think
expect.
so. Yeah,
I write
yeah,
these questions at 2 a.m. sometimes, so
yeah.
I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
could see my
But
note sheet, but yeah, it's fun.
but the thing is, it's not that so I certainly didn't give up on my faith, but I think my faith changed a lot. It developed, maybe I should say, a lot. Um, and so it might have developed in other ways, um, which are not necessarily better or worse, but with just, we all have a different perspective on who God is based on our experience, because the only perspective we have is our own. And so if I'd been through it in a slightly different way, I might have had a slightly different understanding of who God is. And so I don't know. Anyway, that's just kind of a thought off the top of my head.
Well, and a couple things, obviously,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
we'll definitely wrap. And I want to give you time to talk
yeah,
about some of your stuff. But your wife stuck with you the whole time. Obviously, the kids did. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
how much of a strain it put on your marriage. From the sound of it, didn't really put a ton on it because she believed you. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's pretty amazing too, that you stand next to a pretty amazing godly woman from the sound of it.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it wasn't easy. I think in the very first day she had a like, oh my gosh, what if this is true? But then the next day she was like, that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, and just kind of going through some of these things, um, like with like her going with me to the attorney and hearing her say, I can tell you're not guilty, right? That was a reassurance to both of us, right? And so to be in that together, um, and yeah, she was faithful to me, with me, through all of that, and I'm really super super grateful. Yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, I have one of those too. An amazing
yeah,
wife who walked, who's walked with me through
yeah,
the darkest of moments and the joyous of
mm,
moments too. So that's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So,
Cool.
Marcus, tell us what's going on and then we'll play our game. So I'll give you that.
Oh, like what else am I
Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
Okay,
Your
so
book. I'm excited to get that
yeah,
audio copy. And of course you can get
yeah,
the printed copy as well. So tell us how we
yeah.
can do that.
Yeah, so it'll be available on Amazon, and you just search for Beyond Signification, or you can go to my website, markuswatson.com, and that's Markus with a K, Markus, Watson. Anyway, so you can, there's links to the Amazon page on my website
And
there.
we'll link them as well. So yeah.
Pardon me?
I said we
Oh,
will link them
you'll,
as well.
oh,
Yes.
awesome,
But that's
awesome.
okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Of course.
Yeah. And then I've got this podcast, Spiritual Life and Leadership, which really does come out of this whole experience, like recognizing that it's not just about having good leadership skills. It's also about letting ourselves be formed by God in the inner life, right? That's the spiritual life part. So to be a spiritual leader, you have to have a life of inner transformation and surrender and just openness to what God wants to do in your life. And so some of our episodes talk about kind of outer life stuff, outer life leadership, church stuff, and some episodes focus more on the inner life and spiritual formation and that kind of thing. And then the book, Beyond Thingification, again, kind of focuses on this idea that people are not things, but it kind of paints a picture of how we've gotten to where we are now, where people are just not interested in church, and the struggle that churches have now to try to figure out how to be a church in a world in which, church and Christianity and religion in a lot of ways has been marginalized, or not necessarily marginalized, but it's just one of many things, and people are just, religion's fine. So how do we be the church that the world needs us to be, which I think is the church that God's calling us to be? And I talk about a way that churches, kind of something I call vocational connection groups, that churches can use to discern together what God is already up to in their communities, and then rather than coming up with some new program that's going to kind of, save their church or be the next big thing, how do we just participate with God, what God is already doing? How do we discern what God is doing, and how do we then participate with Him in what God is doing, so that we can participate with God in bringing healing and wholeness to the world? So
I love that. When you talk about bringing healing and wholeness to the world, my favorite story is next to the gospel. My favorite story is this little boy throwing sea stars back in the ocean. They've washed up on the shore, and they're gonna die if he doesn't get them back in the ocean. And the old man comes along and is like, "What are you doing?" He's like chucking them back in. He's like, "You can't save all these." He's like, "Watch me," as he chucks another one into the water. So
I can save this one, right?
The Reader's Digest version of that story. It's one of my favorites. I've told it so many places, but on the show numerous times. But I love that, and I love that you're doing that. And when you said that, I was like, man, that's the starfish story. I love it. Love it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we play this game. It's called Senseless, and so you're not here. You're in San Diego. I'm sure it's like 90 million degrees outside, gorgeous, sun in the air.
It's nice today. It's in the 70s. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Rough day for you down there. I'm sure that the convertible top is down. Yeah, I'm sure it's nice.
Yeah, right.
hair blowing in the wind on the I-5. So or the 405, whichever it may be. But anyway, so we're gonna play this game. So I'm gonna roll on your behalf because you're not here, and you got a number 1. I don't know if you heard the dice roll or not, but you have to trust me. You got a number 1. So this is so perfect for you. It's almost like God made the dice roll 1.
Oh my!
So you ready? Here we go. Drum roll, please. How do you want others to see you?
Oh man, yeah, that is a great question.
I rolled the die, so I mean that's really what it is. There's only 6 possible answers, and you got the number 1.
I mean, that's for me, it's like that's anyway, that's the perfect question. Like I just want people to know that
predestined or something. Beloved. Like we didn't rehearse this either, so.
Right, I know. It's like God wanted this question. That's what it feels like. I just want people to know that I am God's beloved, right? And that's my primary identity. It's just so this just reminds me of like the Apostle John, right? In the Gospel of John, he always refers to himself as, the disciple Jesus loved. And it sounds kind of, self-serving or arrogant. Oh, you think you're Jesus' favorite, right? And Brennan Manning, I think it's in Abba's Child, he says, I don't think it's that he was arrogant about it. I think it's just that he had come to a place where the most important thing about him was not his name or his accomplishments. It was just the fact that he was the disciple that Jesus loved, that he was loved by Jesus, right? And so I just want to be remembered. Is that what the question was? How do you want people to remember you?
How do you want people to see you? How do others see
you?
Yeah.
Yep. I want people to see me as God's beloved child, and I guess in addition as someone who makes them recognize their own belovedness. That's my answer.
That's
Final
awesome.
answer.
That's powerful, man. So go check him out. Markus has a great show, great website. We'll of course link all that in our show notes. I'm gonna do that. There we go. That worked. Hey, this of course has been Other People's Shoes. Wasn't that awesome? Wasn't Markus great? I like his insight. Really good stuff there. Go check out his stuff. We'll of course link that in our show notes. So please go check that out. And remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Of course, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Stay tuned till next week as we try on other people's shoes. Thank you so much for joining us on Other People's Shoes. As you know, I'm your host, Neil Matthews. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank our guest, Markus. Go out and check out his stuff. His book is now available to you. We, of course, linked that in our show notes, so be sure to check that out. Markus, to me, has an amazing story because I don't know about anybody else. If I was accused of something like that, I think it would really rock my world. And it's good to see that he has held firm to his foundation, his faith, has not wavered. He has not lost it. He has continued to move forward and have that switch foot direction, as we alluded to in the episode. Want to invite you back here next week on, we kind of get a treat for you. So here's a little sneak preview of next week's show.
So that's when I first had this idea that, oh yeah, if I just keep going. But then I would sometimes have gaps. And so I'd have 4 episodes, and then I didn't know what was going to happen. And I had to decide, even if I don't have a guest, I'm going to make something. So even if that meant on a Sunday night, I publish on Monday morning. If on a Sunday night I am down in the basement till 11 o'clock or midnight trying to work on something to publish the next day, I was going to do it no matter what. I was going to make sure there was content on Monday. And that single decision is probably one of the most important ones, right after deciding I was going to be okay with not being good enough right away.
That is right. We're going to be sitting with, in my mind, a godfather of podcasting. More to hear about that next week. We get to sit down with a great man, Eric. He's going to tell us kind of how he got into podcasting and why podcasting is so impactful. So hopefully you can stay tuned for that. Remember to hear past, present, and future episodes of our show, Other People's Shoes. That can be done at opspodcast.com. Great place, of course, to bookmark on your phone. Go back to each week. We do have past, present, and future episodes available to you. Our show, of course, is a non-profit show. So what that means is we would love for you to partner with us financially to help put the show out each and every week. And, of course, do the things that we love to do, which is give stuff away. So that does help in that process as well. So if you'd like to do that, we, of course, have linked that down in our show notes as well. If you'd like to be a part of the show in any way, questions, feedback, anything like that, you of course can use our hotline. That of course is 203-548-7463. For questions, comments, you can of course call in, text in. That number is available to you again, 203-548-7463. And of course, the social media aspect of the show. That's right, we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the handle OPS Podcast Show. So, of course, tweet us, like us, follow us. Love to do that. We are doing daily posts, so please take a look at those. And remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Of course, on behalf of Garrett and myself, we want to thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned until next week as we try on other people's shoes.